Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today, we're going to be going over another one of the Fire Sorceress skills, and this one is one that doesn't really get a lot of love. And it doesn't get a lot of love for good reasons, because it kind of sucks. But we're going to talk about the skill, we're going to talk about why it sucks, and we're going to talk about maybe what they could do to enhance it. And this is the skill Inferno. Inferno doesn't really have a lot of synergies. It's just warmth. So you pretty much just beef up warmth to its maximum, and then you beef up Inferno to its maximum. Now, recently in a video series, my Sorceress Solo Self-Found, I actually found out that, believe it or not, Inferno actually works pretty good at low levels now. And I was actually kind of surprised at this. So let's take this little Sorceress down to normal difficulty, and I'm going to show you really quickly what I mean, because I was actually kind of surprised. To do this, though, we're going to have to take out the skillers, because I don't want to give a negative effect here. We're going to take out all the doojanks, and we're also going to remove the weapon from our mercenary so we can get a better idea of what's going on. Now, basically what this is that at an early level, it actually does pretty significant damage. So assuming, of course, you're running, say, I don't know, let's take off these plus to skill pieces because I don't want to give the wrong effect. You have level 1 Inferno, and you have level 1 Warmth. Well, it actually kills pretty good. I'm not even gonna lie, you can just kind of do this and just things die. Like, it does have a lot of downsides. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm never going to say that Inferno is the greatest ability in the world, but I was actually kind of surprised at its low-level performance because it kind of demolishes targets at this level. And granted, it falls off pretty quickly, but in lower levels, 1 point in Inferno and 1 point in Warmth is actually enough to kill just about any low-level monster in Act 1. And I didn't even put any points in it in my Solo Self-Found video. If you want to check out that video, I'd recommend, going and checking out that video, because really I do have a lot of silly things that I did to, like, bypass parts of the game. And it was very difficult to build the character that I wanted to build in my Solo Self-Found run, because a lot of the skills that I needed were much higher level. So I ended up with Inferno when I was on my way to Firewall. And since I had it, I was like, you know what, let's use it and let's see how well it works. Well, it works surprisingly well. Now, there is a lot of issues with Inferno. The first and main most glaring issue with Inferno is, well, it just doesn't do the damage that it says. Despite the fact that it says it does pretty good damage, which it lies to you, by the way. If you were to max it out and, grab, let's see here. Let me go ahead and throw some points into strength so I can actually wear my gear. And put the gear back on. Mink. If you actually level up Inferno, you notice that it says it actually does a pretty good amount of damage. It says it does 6,805 damage per second with a 22-yard range, and it costs 11 mana per second, which, doesn't seem like too terrible. When you actually utilize it, though, it just doesn't seem to output that same kind of damage output that it's stating. And I think that's the biggest obstacle with Inferno, although it's not the only issue with Inferno. First off is when you actually go out here and you try to utilize it to kill a target, which, again, let's take the infinity off of him so he's not actually killing anything. What you'll notice is that it takes a while even to kill one monster with the ability. And it does pierce, thankfully, which means you can actually hit multiple monsters with it, but it just seems ridiculously slow by comparison to a lot of other abilities. If I were to compare this to anything else in the fire tree, like Fireball, Meteor, Firewall, even Blaze, I'm pretty sure would outperform the way that Inferno dishes out its damage. It also seems to be missiles. If you guys have never actually done this, I would encourage you to play around with this. So when you cast Inferno, it looks like it's a solid line, right? Oh, look, it's like I'm burning fire at somebody, right? No. That's not how Inferno works. It doesn't do that, okay? How Inferno actually works is it's individual little missiles. Each missile is a size 1 projectile. Size 1 is the smallest size that you can possibly have for projectiles. So if you take your Inferno and you do this, you will see each of the size 1 projectiles. And it starts to make more sense why Inferno doesn't really do the damage that it states that it's doing, because each individual projectile is doing a percentage of the damage output. You have to hit the monster with every single projectile to dish out the full damage, which means that if any of the projectiles miss the target, then you're not dishing out the full damage that you would normally do. And because they're size 1 projectiles, they generally tend to miss targets. There's also a very large lag time in the time it takes for the Inferno to fire and the time it takes for the Inferno to reach the target at maximum distance. As you can clearly see, it takes 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000. It's just as bad as Meteor. Meteor takes 3 seconds to land on the target, and Inferno takes 3 seconds to reach the target as well. At earlier levels, it is kind of terrible in terms of like its range, and so you have to literally be like right next to the target in melee range to actually dish out any significant damage. And I think one of the things that they could definitely do is increase the range of this ability quite dramatically. In fact, let me reset here real quick so I can go to a lower level, and you'll notice that the range of the ability isn't anywhere near as good at a lower level as it is when it's maxed out. At level 1, with basically no plus to skills, let me see if I can finagle that. We're looking at that, which isn't even like it's tiny. And I think the 6-yard radius or 5.3 yard distance. That's as far as it will go. Another big issue with this ability is that it tethers you to the location that you're in, so you can't move when you're using this ability. Which is a pretty big thing for a sorceress. A lot of people, I don't think realize just how terrible it is that you can't move when you're utilizing this ability. Because it makes it so that you're stuck in a bad position to do damage. It only hits one target at a time anyway, and, that's already a big downside. But you have to stand still while you're using it, which makes it into even more of a downside. Now, in recent patches, they have fixed a lot of the issues with the ability. And I have to say that comparatively to what it was before in Diablo 2 Classic, Inferno has come a long way. On a sorceress, which would be utilizing the maximum amount of plus to skills, you can see Inferno says it does about 12,000 damage per second. Now, comparatively, it's not really a lot. If you were to compare it to Firewall, right here, Firewall is doing 33,000 damage per second. And it does it in a way that is a lot more good than frickin' Inferno does. But you can actually use both of them together, so it's kind of weird. So what you would do is you would, cast your Firewall on a target, and then you would cast your Inferno as well, and you could potentially get 2 beads of fire damage on a target at any given time. It's not optimal. The fact that you have to stand still makes it very difficult to actually put the damage out. It takes way too long for the damage to actually reach the target, which half the time means that the monster's already dead by the time your Inferno gets there. Changing targets, like moving around, or if the target is moving at all for whatever reason, like they're not standing still, means that you have to move your Inferno. And as you can clearly see, when you move your Inferno, you're definitely not going to get the full damage. To get the full damage of Inferno, the monster basically has to be standing still, because you have to build the Inferno like this. This is a full stream of Inferno, and this is the full damage. So if we're talking about the damage output of Inferno, if we're saying that it does 11,520 damage per second, this is what we're saying. That this is the equivalent of the 11,520 damage per second. This isn't. This isn't. This is not. This is not. It has to be a full stream constantly hitting the target to dish out the per second damage. Otherwise, you're not getting that 11,000 that it's actually stating. Instead, it's giving you, like, whatever it is divided by the number of actual effects. And if we go over to the Amazon basin, you'll see that it talks about firing a stream of missiles, applying firing damage, as long as the caster continues. Right? They're size 1 missiles, right? So they have very narrow aiming paths, which means you can very easily miss your target. And then it talks about the actual damage that it does. So the displayed fire damage per second calculated based on bit damage is applied every frame, but actual fire damage is based on bit damage being applied every other frame. Which basically means that the damage is actually listed as incorrectly. Now, this was actually fixed, I believe, in patch 2.4. I can't remember all my patch notes. But basically, they changed it so that it actually shows the correct damage or applies the damage correctly. But it still requires that you hit the target with each bit. And that's what Amazon Basin is calling this. So each one of these little fire things is considered just like one attack of the effect. One little bit of the effect. And to get the full effect, you have to attack with the full range of the ability. Now, what could they potentially do to fix this ability? Number one, the size of the missiles needs to change. I think the size of these missiles needs to go up to size 3 missiles, most likely, so that they are much larger and can hit a larger area. In fact, I also think that perhaps making 3 Infernos come out of the target might make this ability a little bit more interesting. For instance, if instead of 1 steady Inferno, imagine it was 3, with 1 going straight and 2 going outward at angles from the first, so that you have like a, kind of like a burning triangle, so to speak, reminiscent of the Deathly Hallows symbol. It would kind of look like the Deathly Hallows symbol without the stone. And if it was 3 Infernos coming out, it might be a little bit more attractive to use, especially since you have to stand still. And I think this is the biggest issue with the ability, is that you have to stand still. Another big issue with the ability is mana regeneration. So it costs 13 mana per second, which is actually a lot. And if you don't actually have a large amount of mana, you can burn through your mana ridiculously fast while using Inferno. Now, later on in the game, when you've beefed up your warmth to its maximum, you've got tons of mana output, you can generally counter the mana cost of the ability easily enough. But at early levels, when you don't really have large amounts of mana and you're having trouble, actually dishing out damage, it doesn't help that Inferno tends to be absolutely terrible to use on any character that doesn't have good mana regeneration. And, for dramatic effect, let's just show this off real quick. So we're going to take off our equipment. I'm going to max out Inferno. And let's see if I can manage to burn through all my mana without warmth. Now, with 1,000 mana, it might be a little bit difficult. Yeah, it's unfortunately going to be a little bit difficult to actually do that with 1,000 mana. And that's kind of the really cool thing about having large amounts of mana, which a lot of people don't realize, is that even without warmth, even without regeneration, even without pretty much anything, just having a large mana pool will give you a pretty significant amount of regeneration. And then, of course, adding in warmth will also help that. Another thing they could potentially do to Inferno to make it a little bit more interesting is give the sorceress some way to counter the fact that they're stuck standing still. Maybe put like a little fire puddle around them while they're casting the ability. Maybe give them a little bit of a defense bump while they're casting the ability. If you're going to be stuck standing still while you're trying to cast an ability, it would definitely be nice if that ability also gave you some kind of buff defensively to make it a little bit easier to actually stand still using the ability. All in all, Inferno tends to be one of those subpar abilities that's beaten out by everything else. It doesn't do anything special that other abilities don't do. For instance, if you're looking for an AoE ability, Fireball or Meteor is probably a better choice in the fire tree. If you're looking for a very high single target damage ability, Firewall is most likely going to outdamage Inferno by miles. In fact, if you can literally just look at it. If I beef up Fire Mastery here and I beef up Firewall to its maximum, you can clearly see that Firewall's damage output far exceeds Infernos by double, if not more than double. It's almost triple the damage output of Inferno, and it's the same exact kind of effect. 33,000 damage per second versus 11,000 damage per second, or 11.5. And so it doesn't win in AoE. It doesn't win in single target. It doesn't win in mana cost because most of the abilities have far less mana cost than Inferno. At 13 point second, it actually burns really fast. It's very difficult for a lot of these abilities to even come close to the amount of mana that Inferno likes to eat up. Even though Firewall is 66 mana per cast, it also lasts for a really long time. I mean, it sits on the ground and it lasts for a pretty lengthy duration. It goes really far, it hits lots of monsters, and it has a pretty decent amount of damage output. Inferno, on the other hand, hits like 1, maybe 2 monsters in a straight line and eats up 13 mana per second, and you have to sit there and hold it down. And this is another big issue with the ability, is that at least with Firewall, which has a casting delay, I can weave in other skills. So if I wanted to weave in, say, Fireball, just as an example, I can weave in the ability. I can cast this, cast. 1, 2, Firewall, 1, 2, Firewall, 1, 2, Firewall, 1, 2, Firewall. You know what you're doing with Inferno? You're not doing anything with Inferno. You're casting Inferno, and that's all you get. You don't get to weave anything else in. You don't get to cast any other spells, because if you stop casting Inferno, then the damage stops. And then you have to reignite the Inferno. And since it takes nearly 3 seconds to reach the full range for Inferno and dish out the full damage output, you're talking about a 3-second delay in your damage output. Huge gaps, basically, for trying to weave the spells. Unfortunately, I just don't really think Inferno is ever really going to be a good skill, and it's really going to require some serious fixing to ever really get what we might want from it. And even then, I feel like even with buffs and even increasing the damage output, it still might never get better than some of the other options that are available within the same tree. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when we're just yakking about Inferno and talking about how bad it is, which is pretty much all I did the entire time. And, as always, keep watching.